Hello, everyone. My name is Hao Yi. I am the reproducibility librarian at the University of Florida, and I have the honor of moderating this final panel for the conference on postgraduate and professional education. So we have with us three great panelists, Richard Ball, who is the director of Project TIER, Amy Riegelman, the social sciences librarian at the University of Minnesota, and Tracy Teal, formerly of the Carpentries and now executive director of Data Dryad. So the topic for this panel on postgraduate and professional education is going to focus a little bit more on, I hope, the training that we provide to faculty members and more senior researchers. As we have kind of discussed through the conference, many of the practices in research reproducibility are changing and changing very rapidly. And so it's an area of continued learning for everyone, myself included. And so as we begin, I want to make sure all our panelists are here. And it looks like Amy and Tracy, you both have your camera set up. Richard, you might have to turn on your camera and mic to show up on the panel. And I will begin by asking each of our panelists to introduce yourself briefly and give us an idea of what you do in your current position on reproducibility training. So why don't we start in reverse order, since Tracy, you already have your mic on.
Oh, well, I didn't mean to, but great. So hi, I'm Tracy Teal. As Hao mentioned, I'm currently the executive director of Dryad, which is a nonprofit generalist data repository. And prior to this, I was the executive director of the Carpentries and a founder of Data Carpentry. So I'll wear both hats when I'm speaking today.
And Amy?
Hi, like mentioned, I'm Amy Riegelman. I'm a social sciences librarian at the University of Minnesota. And I was asked to talk today about reproducibility, a journal club in our chapter at Minnesota. And would you like me to do that presentation right now, or should I hold off?
Right now would be great.
Okay, good. All right, so I'm talking about something called reproducibility. It is a journal club that is designed to read reproducibility and adjacent topics in the literature, functioning like a typical journal club does. Unfortunately, I cannot take credit for the super clever name. Reproducibility started at Oxford from some early career researchers, Amy Orban, Sam Parsons, and Sophia Crowell. And they had designed this journal club as a grassroots effort to get early career folks talking about reproducibility. And I saw this circling around on Twitter in the early days. It must have been either 2017 or 2018. And eventually I contacted BITS. BITS stands for Berkeley Institute for Transparency in the Social Sciences. And that's where I learned all about reproducibility with one of the trainings that they offered. Anywho, I am a catalyst for them, having gone through their program. And so I have an opportunity to do some guest blog posts for them. And so I interviewed Sam, Sophia, and Amy and wrote up a little blog post about their work. And in that work, I asked, is it okay if other institutions kind of copy this journal club and do their own thing? And they were all about it. And so different journal clubs started popping up. Lucky for folks like me who are interested in doing such work, they have a very open reproducibility starter pack available on OSF. So one could visit that site and check out like the different readings that they suggest. Back in January 2020, I visited their map of different journal clubs. So I know University of Minnesota was the first US chapter, but as you can see, others have come on board and it's an international effort. And then yesterday, when I went back to look at the same image, you can see it's grown tremendously. And so reproducibility is known internationally, and I encourage you, if you feel so inspired, to start one at your own institution. Okay. So how did it come to be at the University of Minnesota? I was personally interested based on what I had read and learned from the three founders of it. And then at my institution, there was an internal grant called Many Faces of Reproducibility. It's a 3-year grant. And it's very intentionally getting folks together across the institution, various statuses, students, faculty, etc., from various disciplines to talk about reproducibility. And this came up as an opportunity to use some of that funding to start our own chapter. And that funding would just pay for the tea, some marketing, some treats for these meetings. And we were really intending the audience to be grad students, postdocs, and early career faculty. So from what I've observed, it seems like there's an increased understanding after doing our many readings and meeting twice a month starting last fall, that folks are gaining understanding in reproducibility, replicability, the questionable research practices, p-hacking, learning about open science broadly, and talking about solutions such as register reports and pre-registration. I'd say a bonus is that it's been tremendous for networking. It's been great to have folks from different disciplines, computer science, educational psychology, lots of different disciplines across the university to come together and have conversations about research methods and reporting. Selfishly, being from the libraries, it's a nice opportunity for me to tell folks about some services that we offer, like data curation and the fact that we have a data repository, and even that we offer these data management boot camps. And as we look ahead, like some things that I've been thinking about is it would have been really cool to take the folks when they initially sign up to be part of reproducibility and survey them on what they initially know about pre-registration, for example, or the different QRPs. And then once they leave us, or once we end reproducibility, to survey them on those same questions. So I have some regrets about not doing that, but maybe there's a chance. As you know, we are in a pandemic, so the face-to-face interaction of reproducibilities has gone, instead of in person, now it's on Zoom. So we have some money that was supposed to go to tea and treats. We're talking about ways to get folks gift cards to perhaps buy their own tea. And then we'll have to talk about, once the 3-year grant is over, how we're going to get funding, or if we're going to get funding to do this more. And I just wanted to close, Amy Orvin, one of the founders, wrote this Nature article, and she was talking about how early career researchers may feel that they have little agency to push for improvements for reproducible research. And I like this quote. She said, we need all those who care about better research to stay invested. This will not happen by telling the next generation of scientists to just sit back and hope. So kind of like when folks say that science is self-correcting, well, we have to do that work. And she goes on, early career researchers do not need to wait passively for coveted improvements. We can create communities and push for bottom-up change. So I thought that was inspiring. And there's my contact info. So I will stop sharing and pass the torch.
All right, thank you, Amy. And finally, we have Richard Ball.
Thanks very much. Very happy to be here. So I am a faculty member in the economics department at Haverford College, and I've learned about reproducibility over the last 15 years just by accident, because I was teaching courses where students wrote statistical research papers, And 15 or 20 years ago, I couldn't understand anything that they wrote in their paper. I couldn't understand where their data came from, how they created these tables. And so gradually, bit by bit over time, I started asking them to turn in scripts and data, and then to organize it better, and then to provide some metadata. And after a while, we realized that we were sort of teaching them how to make a whole replication documentation package. And so with my colleague Norma Deros, we founded Project TIER for Teaching Integrity in Empirical Research. And the purpose is to develop curriculum to help other faculty do similar kinds of things in their classes and do outreach, training, workshops, etc., aimed mostly at faculty who want to introduce these kinds of things to their students.
How's that look?
Looks great.
Perfect. Okay. So as I mentioned, I'm currently in a role as the executive director of Dryad, but I'm the when this conference first was coming together, I was at the carpentry. So I'm going to speak primarily kind of from that context, but a little bit about where we see the impact on data as well. So I just want to start by acknowledging that working reproducibly requires new skills and new ways of working, and that this isn't an easy shift. Researchers who already have a lot on their plates, this is something that requires intentional work and energy. And researchers need to connect the theory of reproducibility with practical skills and applications. And so one of the things to really think about is around like reproducibility for future you. So we tend to think about reproducibility in the context of reuse by other researchers, and that's really important. But actually a lot of what we see when it comes down to it is really that the person reusing your data or your code is actually future you. So being kind to future you. So if we have motivated researchers and we want reproducible research, what is that bridge? And that bridge, especially in the context of this panel, is training. And the great thing about that is that people want to learn these skills. So this is a survey from 2013, actually, from the Australian Research Data Council. And what they saw is when they did a survey they said, what's the thing that we could offer? What would you like the most? Training was the most requested above funding. And I think this is one rare situation where I've seen anything be more important than funding. And actually there was just a survey that came out, I believe from the UK as well, that basically said the same thing. So people want these opportunities to learn. This is also reflected in an NSF survey of current unmet needs for researchers. And again, several of these top points here are training. So there's training can help bridge gaps. People want training. So then how do we, oops, there, no, wrong way. Okay, so how do we provide that training, right? As we said, everybody is really busy. There's a lot of new things to learn. How do we make this possible across institutions and organizations? And so how can we develop and provide scalable training? And so I think what Amy talked about is one of those things. I'll speak to that in a second. But we think about it as training in the gaps. So not this idea necessarily that it's going to be a semester-long course, or years-long program, but this is things that we need now. And so how can we provide this in the gaps and use collaborative and open educational resources? So I think about it as these training opportunities need to have these 4 A's: accessible. So at the time that people need them, accessibility, accessible content, languages, approachable. We need to be meeting people where they are. So meeting people, understanding where people are in their skills and helping them from that point. Aligned with what's important to them and the norms in their field, and applicable. So something that they can use right away, not just a set of theoretical principles. And so then how can we deliver them? So I think we're hearing from different panelists on different strategies. The way that the Carpentries, which is a nonprofit organization, the way that they delivered this is through short format workshops, so 2-day workshops that were primarily in person, but have now moved to be online. They've taught 300 online since the pandemic. And so as you notice, I'm just highlighting that the goals here are not learn a particular thing in R or learn a particular command line. The workshop goals are to teach the skills, to get people started and introduce them to what's possible, build confidence in using these skills, encourage people to continue learning. This is an area, of course, where you're never done learning. I'm in a positive learning experience when we talk about a lot of the skills that are important for reproducibility. They are computational. They are places where people have felt disempowered before. And then the workshop materials are open, collaborative, and customizable. So everything is on GitHub. It's all CC BY licensed. And so you can use them as they are, or you can fork them and use them in different contexts and customize them. So it's really a shared resource. We're all learning these things together. We don't need to be recreating content. I wrote this slide wrong. So does this approach work? There have been workshops all over the world. People like the workshops. That's always a good sign. And then, is this changing people's ability to do things in attitudes? So there is a significant change. These are just some questions we ask around programming, confidence, and self-perception that we're having positive impact. Attitudes around reproducible research change. They see how reproducible practices can make analysis easier. Raw data is important. So these are short-term, right after the workshop. The question is, does this persist? And in fact, it does. And so 6 months later, that confidence continues, which is really key. And then when we ask questions about their practices, again, we see this shift in agreement with these practices that align well with reproducibility. So, there's a lot of data. There's a lot more survey data on the Carpentries websites about the impact of this approach. And so kind of to conclude, now on the Dryad side, what are we seeing if we're thinking about open data as being a part of reproducibility, is that we are seeing an increase in the number of data sets that are being shared through Dryad. And I think the other piece of this is, how good are authors at this? We curate all of our data sets, about 25%. We are corresponding with the author, asking them to make changes. And so there's still a lot of opportunity to continue to learn. And I think the key and really what is exciting about this panel and this conference is, that this really is a shared endeavor that we can go further together. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of this panel. And I will try to figure out how to stop sharing. I think I did it.
Great, thank you, Tracy. And last up, I think we have a slide from Richard that will be showing up on the screen shortly.
In fact, I can share my screen now. So Katie, if you don't mind, I'll just go ahead and share my screen and do it that way.
Yeah, that will work great, and we'll just have that back.
Okay, great, thank you. So, all right, just a few general perspectives on graduate education, the role of reproducibility in graduate education, and a little bit about some things Project Here is starting to do right now. I thought I'd start out just by first commenting about what is reproducibility. So we have all these definitions of reproducibility, replicability, et cetera, et cetera. In those terms, I'm talking about computational reproducibility. But how is it embodied? And in the end, the thing that makes it work is documentation, scripts, and when feasible, data, and the README file, other metadata, so that some other researcher can get that research compendium or reproduction documentation, however you want to call it, and sit down at their own computer and just run those scripts, do all the processing and analysis, generate the results. So that's sort of the ultimate end product of doing research reproducibly. However, I make the comment that that's ultimately you end up with this documentation, because there's a lot of steps in between, and it impacts your workflow and the process of research and how you organize your stuff and how you document your work incrementally throughout the entire project, as opposed to waiting till the very end and then scrambling to try to put together some documentation. So why should grad students do this? It's probably not a hard sell to this audience that they should be doing it. And the comment I have about that really kind of echoes one thing that Tracy said a moment ago. Part of it, well, people should be learning to do reproducible research because that's an essential skill just to make your research credible. That norm is becoming stronger and stronger as days go by. So really, being able to construct replication documentation is required by more and more journals. It's just a bread and butter professional skill. But the second part of the why is, I call it quality of life enhancements. And this has to do with the fact that you're not just making documentation for someone else to come along and use when you're done, but by adopting a workflow where you're working in scripts all the time, keeping your stuff organized in a nice structured directory hierarchy, you make life much easier for yourself, and you correct mistakes more easily. You don't lose your data. You don't have to redo 17 steps every time you start working when you have everything in scripts, and can work that way. So that really, it reduces stress and increases efficiency. It's a win-win kind of proposition. Okay, so now the question is, so at what point in graduate education should these things be introduced? And my answer to that is, there's like no single point. Our idea is that in education and professional research, this reproducibility should just be thoroughly integrated into learning and research at all phases. So from the first, even going back to undergraduates, from the first time they're doing their first t-test, the way they do that t-test is by writing a script that says, open up this data file, and then do this t-test, and write a command that saves the output. And then instead of just turning in a printed answer showing your results, you turn in that script. And that's the real product. And from there, just incrementally augmenting it so that as projects and assignments get more complicated, there's a little more structure in the documentation, but at all points, that's just the way that they work. So right through graduate education. So there's obviously a lot of benefit for moments of power boost with something like a boot camp for first-year students, or some special component to like a second-year paper or some kind of project. But really, we're talking about a whole culture and norms of how people do research, and that should really be integrated into the whole graduate program. Okay, so should different departments adopt policies about this? So should the Department of Memology at Wallywell University have a policy that doctoral dissertations have to meet these standards of reproducibility, or what have you? I think in principle, that's a good idea. Having some departmental standardization avoids everybody reinventing the wheel. Everybody knows what to expect in other people's works. You can develop a shared culture and practice, shared norms about how you do things, and it can be very mutually reinforcing to have a whole community of people adopting similar practices. Now, one issue that comes up sometimes then is, well, so what exactly should those standards be? And, 5 years ago, and I'm speaking mostly from the social science perspective, there were not standards for replication documentation. The policies, a number of journals had data policies, but they were very vague. And apart from not being enforced, they really didn't explain very well what authors were supposed to do. But that's changed a lot. And in particular, there's a link here to this AEA policy, which you don't have this document, so you don't have the link, but if you Google AEA data policy, that's for the American Economics Association. They just a couple of years hired a data editor who looks after the replication documentation for all the AEA journals, and they've done an amazing job of putting together clear, precise, they're as detailed as they need to be to make people clearly understand what they're talking about, but they don't go beyond that to be excessively heavy, and they're very practical and down to earth. So at least, and I believe there are similar initiatives in natural sciences and different fields, so in fact, when I talk about departments developing their policies or their standards for reproducibility, it seems to me it would make a lot of sense for them to not just develop their own departmental policy, but look to some of these discipline-wide or even wider than one discipline policies that are emerging, because now there's some really good, effective ones. Okay, so if this is such a great idea and there's good resources out there to get guidance from, how come everybody's not doing it? And one issue is that it just happens if somebody brings us up in a department meeting, there's not going to be 100% agreement about should there be these policies and what should they be. And there are different ways one could respond to that. My general thought about it is that, now this is subjective, people can have other approaches, but my thought about it is, why fight battles about it? Because, as I say, if there's some resistance now, there's going to be what I call like a demographic solution to this problem. As new generations of researchers move in and other generations retire, I think the newer generations are very much more on board. And in the meantime, even if you can't get a departmental consensus, even as an individual faculty member in your courses and your research supervising, you can adopt some standards and what have you. So I would say, don't fight departmental battles, just do the best in your own work and set an example that way. And people will see what you're doing and begin to, you'll win converts just by setting an example rather than fighting people about it. Okay, so those are just some general perspectives. And then Project Tier right now is, we're just starting a new program that's going to work with graduate students. And we're piloting this program at three places: psychology at Oregon State, and archaeology at the University of Washington, and political science at Yale. And in each of these cases, there are pretty large undergraduate classes that are, the instructor of record is a faculty member, but then there are a bunch of TAs who work with sections in the course. And it's the TAs who do the hands-on data work with the students. And so what we're going to do is we're going to send people from Project Tier to spend a day or two training these grad students about how to teach their undergraduates to do this work reproducibly. And that is going to get us, it's mainly like, explicitly, it's designed to serve undergraduates, and it's a way of sort of getting large numbers of undergraduates at big universities and big classes. But at the same time, it's sort of a stealth strategy for reaching the graduate students, because we have an expectation that as grad student TAs start to see some of these methods, they're going to realize, wow, that makes sense. And maybe I'll organize my own research that way. And that's, so as an indirect effect, we think we might affect grad student culture and practices as well. And I'll just put it out there that we're hoping after this pilot to be able to scale up to a bunch more institutions. And we would love to hear from any institutions that have graduate programs where grad students do training of undergraduates as TAs. We would love to find more sites in the future to do this kind of training. So those were my prepared remarks.
Thank you. So I guess on that topic of getting faculty on board, I'm wondering if the panelists can talk a little bit about their successes and challenges in, recruiting folks who are interested in getting training and further education on reproducibility and topics like this.
Sure. So when we were planning on first scheduling these reproducibilities, we surveyed folks to, so large email lists, pretty much. And then folks who expressed interest, we asked them about their, availability. And so the first semester that we had the Journal Club, we ended up with 3 different cohorts. We're a large institution, so that made sense for us. We'd all be doing the same readings, but it would be 3 different cohorts. And then we dropped that down to 2 as people started dwindling away throughout the semester. Journal clubs are hard. If you've ever been part of them before, it's hard to keep up with the readings. Folks are really busy, and so they're not always able to attend. They have competing interests. And so attendance is sometimes awesome, and then other times not so much. And so I would just say that it's hard to get people to come. I think our journal club, when we're able to meet in person, has the incentive of food and tea. And so that is helpful. And I know some other events that we put on in the libraries seem to get better attendance if we have pizza or whatever, free lunch involved. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. Tracy?
Thanks, yeah, great question. I would say, so in carpentries, they're short format workshops, so they're 2 days intensive workshops, and or you could break them out into modules, and that's a pretty effective way to get engagement because people can sort of set aside that amount of time and do it over that. It's not the sort of sustained, as you mentioned, Amy, that's can be a challenge. So I think that format is pretty effective. There are definitely more graduate students and postdocs are the majority of the participants, some faculty, but not as many. And I think if we're thinking about different stakeholders in this space, the type of training that we would want to offer or provide to a PI, sort of the same mid-career PI, may be different than the postdoc or graduate student, recognizing that they're not necessarily as hands-on. They want to be able to supervise someone who's writing the R script. They don't want to be able to write it itself, write the R script themselves necessarily. And so I've been in conversations with Jason Williams, who also leads a training effort around what would that curriculum look like, and I think in kind of a short format.
Sure. How do you go about recruiting, I guess, fellows into your program?
So, recruiting fellows is not so hard because it's sort of self-selected. There are enough people out there who are interested already that happens. But in terms of spreading the word more broadly, for established faculty members, it's hard to get them to change the way that they're doing things. And so I was talking about the strategy of not trying to force it on anybody, but more lead by example, see the benefits. In my own department, when we started doing this, pretty much lukewarm reception. And now I would say about 2/3 of the department are pretty well on board. Sort of 12 years later, we made substantial but not complete progress. And anything we had done to try to drag the others along would have been counterproductive. So it's more like creating resources, like those AEA guidelines. Those are huge, because that's like, here's something that tells people concretely, how can I do this? So that's also largely how we got the idea of this TA training model, is because we've had a lot of uptake from faculty at small colleges, where the expectation is faculty will be closely involved with students, that they don't mind doing close hands-on supervision. But when the model is that a faculty member lectures to 300 students, that's not at all feasible. So in a way, this TA training approach is to be able to do something without the instructor of record having a really big role in it. It's nice. Fortunately, with our pilots, we're working with faculty who are sympathetic and working with us. But in the future, the idea is it wouldn't require a lot of buy-in or a lot of attention from the faculty member if they're not that interested. So,
Add one more thing.
so those are some thoughts.
One thing that I've observed with the folks that do self-select to attend this journal club is that they're already early adopters. And so I just worry that the folks that we really need to reach are out there. So I would just add that, like, folks see reproducibility, they're already jazzed about it, and they self-select to come. And so I think we need to do a better job of targeting those folks that actually need it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Amy. And I would say for carpentry's workshops, you're teaching reproducibility, but it's actually kind of sneaky. You're saying, oh, learn this skill that you need to do your research. And here, and as we teach you, we're teaching you to do it reproducibility. So there is really high attendance, workshops sell out. A lot of people want to come, but it's not pitched as come learn about reproducible practices. It's pitched as come do your research. And I think that framing does make a difference.
Yeah, I think exactly. I sort of totally agree with that. And sometimes people working in this area present it as, here's a new paradigm to revolutionize the way you do research. And then, I get 20 emails a day about new paradigms that I delete. And that's not very attractive. But so another approach is to say, here's something to help you do what you're trying to do and make it a little easier and more effective. And people are more receptive to that. And then, but then plus, it is kind of an in, because then people learn about bits and things, and then maybe get interested, or maybe not, but they still learn something from it.
Great. So I think that will lead very well into a question from the audience. Do the panelists recommend any particular resources or collections of resources for those wanting to integrate reproducibility into coursework and curricula?
Well, I do. That's not carpentry. I mean, yes, of course. I will point back at the carpentry's resources because they are open access and modular and adaptable. And so we do know a lot of faculty who have taken different components of them and put them in their courses. So if you're thinking, oh, I want to teach a skill, oh my gosh, I have to create a whole module on how to teach this skill, at least you have a starting place. So I think that modular aspect is really important for resources. Also at the University of Florida, Ethan White created data carpentry for a semester-long data carpentry course that is also open source, modular, and built specifically for that semester format. So that's another great resource. I think there's a a stats course at UBC. Jenny Bryan started. That's a great set of materials. I think, definitely one of our challenges in this space is discoverability of those resources. A lot of things exist scattered all over GitHub and different people's slide decks. And so finding things, knowing what they have. And so that is also, again, an initiative of Carpentries and Carpentries Labs is to create a place for people to put these types of lessons on a variety of topics to aid in discoverability and consistency in how the material is presented.
Great. Amy or Richard?
Two things come to mind. First, there is a professor at Carleton College, and I'm blanking on her name right now, and I just tried to quickly search and I couldn't find it. But she is, I believe, a psychologist, and she is teaching a course, or was this semester, on reproducibility, and she has some amazing videos that she has shared on Twitter and elsewhere. So I'm really jealous of the students in her class. But that's a whole class dedicated to the topic, not these reproducibility components in the curriculum across a whole discipline. And then another thing to add is I get invited to classes quite a bit lately to talk about how to do a systematic review. And I have opinions about whether or not students should be doing a systematic review in a semester course, because they take years. But I definitely slip in reproducibility topics when I'm giving those presentations, because the methods of a systematic should be reproducible. And systematic reviews themselves influence reproducibility if you think about the evidence pyramid. So that's about all I have to say about that.
So I'll just add that, so what Project here is trying very much to do to serve exactly people who are asking exactly this kind of question. So our sort of focus constituency or audience is faculty members who want to introduce this stuff into their classes. And so if you go to the Project here website, then you can look around and see what we have, and shoot me an email or shoot info@Project here, what Project here is like a couple of guys. It's not like this whole thing. So don't feel like it's a big deal to approach. Just shoot us an email, and we'd love to hear from you and talk to you about it. But it's exactly people who are teaching classes. We meet tons of these people who say, oh, I've been teaching quantitative methods in political science for 12 years, and every semester I say I got to do some reproducibility, and then I never got around to making the handouts. So we say, well, we've got some handouts for you, so let us help you out.
Great. And yeah, so I think on the topic of change over time, do you see things speeding up or more demand for educational opportunities? What are your kind of big picture views on this shift in reproducibility education?
I think it's fun that you use the word speeding up, because I was going to say, I think a takeaway from my cohort that I'm facilitating for Reproducibility Journal Club is that we talk about slowing down. Much of our research is rushed, or we held to really increase the number of publications and presentations that we have for our CVs. And so we're trying to be more like slow and thoughtful. So thinking about slow science. But yeah, I do think more folks are talking about reproducibility. It's not as mysterious as it was a few years ago. And I think different disciplines are finally seeing themselves in their own reproducibility replication crisis. If they didn't see themselves before, they would say like, oh, that's a psychology problem. Well, not really. You might have HARC in your own discipline. So I think it's spreading across more to different disciplines.
So I can jump in here. So I do think that there's more interest and acceptance of the concept of aiming for reproducibility. And I think a lot of that is driven by incentive systems, journals, grants. It's the bottom up meets the top down. But I think, we've always seen a lot of demand, especially at the postdoc graduate student level, for these skills. There's really, again, they're very coupled, I think, opportunity to teach the things that researchers need to do in working with data in a way that emphasizes reproducibility, so that demand for training is there. I've seen that demand for training be there. What I haven't seen is a complementary commitment to resourcing training, the type of training that's needed right now. And I think that this happens in a lot of different spaces. Outreach and education still live in the land of outreach and education and broader impacts, budgets. And I think that there's an opportunity for a shift there to better resource these activities to actually really help meet the demand, because I do see that the demand is there.
Or do you think there is more interest now than there was when you started 12 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, yeah, it's still growing and it still has a way to go, but it's come a long, long way. And I keep harking back to these AEA guidelines. It's like there were previous generations of versions of AEA guidelines that were like sort of like a Saturday Night Live skit, about bumbling, ineffective approaches. And then with this latest version, it's like, a few people sat down and just locked themselves in a room for about a year and worked hard on it, just thinking about it, and came up with something that seems really, really good. So that itself is a huge step. And so, yeah, 12 years ago, I really wondered, is this just going to be a thing that buzzes around for a little while and then peters out, or is this really going to be a real change that lasts? And I don't, things are never perfect, but I think there are real changes underway that really are going to stick.
So we have a question, and I did not grant this question. Are any of you aware of librarians who share your interests?
Norm Medeiros, co-director of Project Here, with whom I've been working since the year 2000, and who super involved. And he's a very collegial, gregarious person, loves to hear from people. And he has a lot of views about the roles of librarians and the way librarians can get productively involved.
And I know, Amy, I think you had helped coordinate a conference earlier this year that had a lot of librarians involved.
Right. It was a reproducibility themed conference attended by librarians. Yeah, and I guess I would just say, before the word reproducibility really got popular or picked up in the popular press, even in 2013-ish time, or back in 2005 with INAVs. But I would say librarians have been doing a lot of this work. So the data management support, hosting data repositories, thinking about long-term preservation, even how they have advocated for open access, and how scholarly communication has shifted very strangely from print to online and is behind paywalls. And open access means many eyes on the materials and a more equitable access. So we can critique that work sometimes for the first time now that it's more open. So I think librarians have been talking about these things for a long time before the word reproducibility became mainstream.
Yeah, I would just agree with that. I think librarians are library community or leaders in this space and had concepts of provenance and archiving before we were thinking about it for digital data. On the carpentry side, a lot of the memberships are through libraries. They're involved in the training. I just taught a workshop for the National Library of Medicine yesterday. And then with my Dryad hat on, there's a data curation network that is institutional repositories, primarily based in libraries that are curating, stewarding, supporting researchers. A lot of great ideas and energy in the library community.
So we have about 5 minutes left, and I want to make sure we have a little bit of time set up for organizing the breakout questions or the breakout sessions. And I want to conclude with a question about if you had one wish or one kind of pie in the sky change in the research ecosystem that you could have, what would it be, including things like changes in institutions or whatever it is that comes to your mind?
Hinted at it, I think, in my last comment, but taking publishing out of for-profit. If you're not familiar with the profit margins of these big publishers, I guess I won't name their names. You might want to look into that more and think about all of the free labor that you give for doing peer review and writing these articles, only for it to go behind paywalls. And consider like the money that you pay them for APCs, article processing charges, and consider all of the money that your institutions, your libraries pay them additionally for the resources that are behind paywalls if it's a hybrid journal. And so my pie in the sky would be, we need to reevaluate the whole publishing system and avoid for-profit publishing.
Definitely one of my 3 wishes too.
I love this question. Yeah, I think one of mine would be that I guess stick to the training as an impact driver is that these reproducible practices are integrated into our science curriculum at the undergraduate, I would say K-12 undergraduate level, that from the start when we're learning these things, we learn them this way. And so that it isn't an extra, but simply, not simply, but this is how we work. And so we're getting to people too late. It's more difficult to change practices than it is to embed them at the beginning. And it's a real problem for how people feel about their work, the type of work that is produced. We need to support people in these ways of working. And that starts with education, and it starts early.
All right, last one to you, Richard.
So I think we're witnessing, and all these changes, like a whole shift in norms about how you do research. And I think it's going to become a stronger and stronger norm that you've got to make your stuff reproducible, which often boils down to making a nice research compendium to go with your PDF paper. And my pie in the sky is on the consumer side, the people who go and read published papers. I don't think they should believe anything in the paper unless there's reproduction documentation and they can get it on their own computer and play around with it, run the scripts and generate the results, and then change the model a little bit and see how that changes the results. But that should be like a standard way of reading a paper, is to get your hands dirty on your computer with the data. And so I'd like to see the norm being that if that's not available, or if the stuff doesn't run, that would be like a mathematical paper with no proofs. Just say, here's my theorem, hope you like it, but no proof. Like that, it should be just like not credible. And that, I don't know how much that's going on yet. That people, I mean, there is the whole cottage industry of doing assessments of reproducibility of a bunch of different stuff, but just in the normal course of research, how many people read articles that way? I'm not sure.
Great. Well, thank you all for those answers, and thank you for participating in this this discussion panel. I had a lot of fun and enjoyed it, and hopefully we will have the chat preserved and all the wonderful links that people have posted will be saved. So thank you all for being here.